So let's talk about the DeSantis situation. Um, I'm very torn about this because, on the one hand, I've spent years and years talking about how I found anti-Trumpism to be uh, sort of a quasi pathetic dodge often, and I don't really feel like I want to move off of that position. But I can't say that I'm anti DeSantis because there's some things that I think DeSantis has done that really piss me off. And I don't just mean like how he ran for governor, which I've talked about a million times. I mean like letting his people get into this weird. This was unfolding yesterday. Trump was at an event, I guess, in Iowa, defending to some extent his support for Operation Warp Speed, which was great, right? I mean, I'm trying to be intellectually honest here. Operation Warp Speed was great. Trump deserves a lot of credit for Operation Warp Speed. It was a good thing. Saved lots of lives. He should be proud of it. The problem is the people who love the vaccine and should be grateful for Operation Warp Speed hate Trump for other reasons, so they're never going to be persuaded by it. And the people who hate the vaccine love Trump and they don't want to hear him talk about how great the vaccine was. So he's kind of in this funky, weird bind. And anyway, DeSantis's people, the DeSantis War Room Twitter account and that kind of thing, we're trying to do this weird carom shot thing or bank shot thing where they criticize Trump for not acknowledging all the problems with vaccines. And I don't like DeSantis's flirting with anti-vax stuff. And I think it's bad. And I'm not going to overlook it. I'm not going to lie about it. And this is the problem with being anti-anti, right? It's sort of like anti-communism. That's where the formulation, my understanding, originally comes from. Is that when you're anti something, you end up dismissing, ignoring, downplaying, minimizing, etc., perfectly legitimate criticisms by going into this defensive crouch, just say, stop criticizing Trump or Stalin or whoever, because that's not where we should be. It's a form of popular front thinking. And it was funny when I announced that Dave Bonson was going to be on the Remnant on Twitter, and I asked for questions, someone came at me and said, are you and Bonson need to talk about how you need to start carrying water for DeSantis or we're going to be stuck with Trump again or something more colorful. And I said to the guy, look, I just spent 7 years talking about how I don't think I should carry water for politicians out of some sort of partisan, popular front kind of thing. And I'm not going to start doing that for DeSantis. So with all of those caveats in mind, I'm pretty sympathetic to the anti-DeSantis position in a few regards. First of all, I think a lot of his alleged sins are overblown. If you look into, and again, I don't like what he did with Disney. I think it was politically unwise. I think it was policy-wise bad, all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to carry water for the guy. There are lots of things I dislike. But first of all, I just have nothing but exhaustion with people who have been saying that Trump is a unique threat to the American political system. He's uniquely unqualified. He's uniquely unfit. But, now that it makes sense for a new Lincoln Project rollout, we should say that DeSantis is worse. And I don't think DeSantis is worse than Trump. DeSantis would not be my first choice for president. He would not be my second choice for president. He would not be my third choice for president. But if he's the only one who could beat Trump in the GOP primaries, he is my first choice for the nomination for the GOP. Just as a matter of strategic voting. That doesn't mean I'm on the DeSantis train or anything like that. And frankly, I think my understanding is that the last thing in the world that the DeSantis people is for people like me and say David French to come out four square behind DeSantis. But if I were Foursquare behind DeSantis, I would say so too. I'm just not into the sort of endorsement kind of politics stuff. And I think this whole sort of like, do you support so and so kind of thing is a kind of magical thinking. But anyway, I think DeSantis is much more of a normal politician than people think. I think that I would have profound disagreements with him about um, public policy if he were president of the United States, I suspect. But I think the real Ron DeSantis is a nerdy guy who, reads his briefing papers and homework. And go back and look. I've been writing for over 15 years now about one of my biggest problems with GOP politics is the number of presidential candidates who refuse to do their homework. Mitt Romney did his homework. It's one of the things I admired about him greatly. Just do your homework. Read the friggin' binder. If you could have, like charismatic attachment, that sort of organic bond with the masses that populists have and all that kind of stuff that comes from charisma and all that. If Mitt Romney could have bought that, he would have bought it because he could afford it. But he didn't have it. And so instead what he did was he did his homework. He compensated by doing his due diligence. And DeSantis is sort of like Romney in that regard. He doesn't have the sort of natural charisma, the natural connection with audiences, but he does his homework. And I'd rather a president, even one who I think is wrong on some issues, who does their homework than one who is charming and funny and entertaining, but doesn't do their homework. And if there's anybody in American public political life of the last, 100 years that has made it to the presidency, certainly, who didn't do their homework, it's Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is just powerfully ignorant. And doesn't mean he's dumb, but he, by his own account, follows his instincts rather than his intellect. And he thinks his instincts are what make him a genius. And, instincts can steer you wrong, particularly if you're an old man. So anyway, I think, it doesn't look like DeSantis is catching fire. I thought the Twitter Spaces thing was dumb and sort of political malpractice. And which is not to say he couldn't do a Twitter Spaces thing, just the idea of announcing your candidacy with audio only on this thing that most people can't figure out how to get on, and even more people don't even know what it is, was just dumb. It was very sort of inside the bubble, inside the bunker kind of thinking on display. But also because of that, I don't think it did any particular damage. I mean, it didn't do any lasting damage. For now, I think I pointed this out last week on the Dispatch podcast. It could come back to haunt him because political reporting is often, trend pieces are often, all they need is like 3 examples to prove a trend. And he has now given one really good example of a campaign that misreads the moment, that screws up on important things. And if he has 2 more of them, then you've got 3, right? So you would rather have had a great photo op, a great soundbite, a big crowd saying nice things and all that. And which wouldn't have mattered that much, except there would have been no downside to it. And instead the Twitter thing was stupid. But again, I don't think it was supremely important either. But since then, I think he's done a pretty good job. I think the whole sort of he yelled at a reporter thing has been wildly exaggerated. I think the effort, and this is the essence of my anti DeSantis stuff. I think the effort to turn him into a demon figure is misguided if it's coming from people who honestly and sincerely, or at least used to honestly and sincerely think it would be calamitous to have Donald Trump back in the White House. And it's not obvious to me that DeSantis can beat Biden. I think DeSantis would do better against Biden than Donald Trump would. But I just think DeSantis is a much more normal politician than people think he is. I agree with Continetti about, I think we talked about this last week. I agree with Matt Continetti that he's got a different theory of the case about how to deal with American dysfunction, American problems, wokeness, whatever, insofar as he's a guy who wants to turn the institutions around against the left. I think he's going to have, even if he becomes president, he would have limited success with that. But that doesn't mean, the successes he did have would necessarily be all bad. The devil's in the details kind of thing. I do think that if you're going to have a serious strategy about, like when he promises that he's going to put the left on the dustbin of history, that's stupid. But it's political hyperbole. And, the people who want to make it sound as if you should take everything DeSantis says literally. They're just trying to scare people into sort of, it's sort of super PAC BS as far as I can tell. It's sort of like, speaking of super PACs, the New Republic has been on this tear about raising money to fight to save the Supreme Court from Ron DeSantis or something. And they had this thing, on Twitter the other day announced, I know I'm very Twitter heavy today. That's because I'm unprepared. They had this thing on Twitter the other day about how Ron DeSantis has a plan to make the Supreme Court 7-2 majority conservative. And, as I pointed out, actually every Republican running for the job has a very similar plan to appoint conservative justices. The idea that like this is unique to Ron DeSantis is sort of nuts. Anyway, that's where I stand on all that. People need to calm down a little bit. If you're a strategic voter, if you've been telling me for the last, as some of our friends of the Bulwark have been doing, been telling me for the last, 7 years or 5 years or 3 years, whatever it is, that opposition to Trump means you have to vote for Democrats and, put aside all of your ideological and moral commitments, because Trump is that much of a threat. And you should not ask for anything in return from Democrats for your vote or for your support. And now you're saying that, you should have the same philosophy about Ron DeSantis. Tells me you're basically just a Democrat. And that's fine. There's no dishonor in being a Democrat. But, the way you get the GOP to move on from Trump is to defeat Trump in the primaries. And I'm all in favor of doing that, right? And if I would much rather Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or Chris Sununu or Mike Pence, basically the field. Even Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think is a bit of a fraud, be fine with any of them beating Trump. And there's some I would prefer beating Trump, or most, I think. But this sort of sense of panic from people like, oh, we're not going to be able to yell about Donald Trump anymore, so we have to turn DeSantis into the next Donald Trump, I just think is annoying and wrong.